Hey everyone, this is Jen and you're watching BPD Woman. On this channel, you will learn how to live more effectively with your borderline personality disorder. My goal is to help you achieve your goals by sharing my experience, wisdom, research over the last 2 decades of living with a disorder and heavily relying on skills such as DBT. My goal is to help you become more effective in your emotional, personal, financial life. Whatever goals that you have set out for yourself, it's my goal to help you achieve them using the insight that I have behind me. If you're a family member or just interested in positive approaches to discussing and healing borderline personality disorder, you are also in the right place. Welcome. There's a playlist just for you entitled Tools and Resources for the Family, and I will put up a link. And if you have BPD, you are definitely in the right spot. And if you have BPD and you want to recover and replace your maladaptive behaviors with effective ones, you are most definitely in the right place. While I am not a psychologist or a therapist, I can answer one question that most of those folks cannot, which is, what is it like to have BPD? I was diagnosed over 20 years ago, and since then I have committed my blood, sweat, tears, money, resources, and emotional and intellectual efforts into my BPD recovery. That means signing up for half a dozen DBT classes, like full 24 weeks. That means reading books, rereading them, doing workbooks, redoing them, going to one-on-one classes and to group sessions. You get the idea. I'm pretty committed. And while I don't have a psychologist degree, I do have the disorder. And that's something that psychologists, most of them anyway, 99% of them, cannot offer to you. So if that all sounds good to you, please do hit subscribe and the bell below so you never miss a beat. I produce anywhere from 3 to 6 videos each week, and I'd love you to check them out. So today I want to do a rather short video, and it's going to be discussing the rigidity of behaviors and thinking that often you will find associated with borderline personality disorder. One of the main hallmarks of having the disorder, and I'll put up the DSM criteria, the DSM 5, DSM standing for Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it is the go-to guide for mental health professionals in determining and diagnosing all sorts of disorders, including mood disorders, personality disorders, etc. And one of the hallmarks of having BPD, and if you have BPD, you are well aware of this, is splitting, or what we call black and white thinking. And so we have a tendency to think very black and white instead of in that gray colored thinking. And very indicative of that is rigidity. Black and white thinking is rigid, and it's either this or it's that, right? It can only be this or that. And you will also find that you act on impulsive behaviors, such as cutting someone off, blocking them, breaking up with someone, what I like to call the preemptive strike. And so in today's video, I want to talk about how you can become less rigid and more flexible. And so that's today's video, which is entitled Be Like Gumby and Less Like Barbie, learning how to be flexible and learning to be less rigid when you have BPD. So let me give you some examples to highlight what this rigid thinking and patterns of behaviors are. And perhaps you can identify, I'm going to use my own personal experiences, and perhaps you can identify with some of these. Perhaps you can relate to some of these. Just give me a shout out. Let me know what you think below. So let me go through some of the ways that I have been super rigid in the past. So one of them, and I will say, obviously, like I still have a tendency to, especially when I'm stressed or feeling sick or ill or not my 100% self, I find, and perhaps you will find as well, that we sometimes realize that we're falling back into these old rigid patterns, and that's okay. Like, upward climb, you're gonna take a step forward and have a couple steps back sometimes. That's just the natural progression of getting recovered. So scheduling and times I used to be super rigid about, and I'm obviously, you know, people will run a few minutes late and stuff like that. And there's also a boundary when people are consistently late and they're being abusive of your time, or they're being disrespectful of your time. Like they'll say they'll be there at 5, but they're there at 6. I don't have any time for that. I cannot. So that is a good example of me being rigid. But while there's rigidity and there's flexibility, there's also that gray area, right? So a nice way to look at this would be to say, yes, he was late today, but 9 times out of 10, he's always on time. So, right. Okay. So being rigid would be saying you are always late. I need you here at this specific time all of the time. That would be a very rigid way to think. And I would do that, you know, like, no, my appointment starts at 2 p.m. If I'm late to the doctor's office and it's 2:05 p.m., like, you'll give my time slot away. So it's 2 p.m. Where is the doctor? I need to be seen right now, right? So that has been another way. So schedule some times. Like I'll be very adamant, like, this is my time. I need this to happen right now. We need to make this go. Okay, let's do it. And one way just to kind of play like devil's advocate coach here is that this rigidity and this structured patterns, I think in my own experience, I can say, has come from a great loss of having structure built into my life, right? If you were like me, you grew up with parents that weren't always physically or emotionally present, or if they were physically or emotionally present, you didn't know what state they would be in. Would they be getting along? Would they be beating on each other? Would they be arguing, right? And so if you've grown up unstable, at least for my money, I think it only makes sense that I've like developed more and more and more and more stable. And sometimes that can go into an extreme. And again, that's where that gray area comes into. But that's just a little side note about why I believe we've become so rigid in our thinking. You know, we need expectations, we need predictability. And, you know, hopefully most healthy kids grow up like that, right? They are provided structure, there's a routine. Okay. And if you don't have it, then perhaps you become very rigid or inflexible when you are older and you see your borderline behaviors start to show up. Normally they show up to late teens, early adulthood. So 18 to 24 is when a lot of people, I think, become diagnosed. At least I was. So another way that I've used to be very rigid, and I was very much like Barbie. So, I'm sorry, by the way, for those of you who don't know who Gumby and Barbie are, I don't know where you've been the last 50 years. I'm just kidding. So obviously Barbie is a plastic doll and her hands are very, like, you know, rigid. And where Gumby was an animatronic claymation character that had his own show, I want to say in the 60s. And then he became, you know, a stuffed animal, and you'll see him all over. Like, it's really popular with dog toys. Like, there's a lot of Gumby dog toys. Maybe I just see that because I have a dog. Anyway, so Gumby was like this flexible claymation creature. So Barbie's the rigid character in this story, and Gumby is the flexible character that we are aiming to become. So another way that I have been very rigid in the past, in a way that I took this way to an extreme, was with diet, weight, calories, counting. I can only have a half cup of cereal. I can only weigh 110 pounds. If I weigh over, if I've gained 1 pound, I'm going to throw up all my food. And these types of rigid patterns for me developed both into bulimia and anorexia. Now I can say I'm fully recovered. While I keep track of what I eat, in kind of a loosey-goosey kind of way, I certainly no longer restrict myself on, I must measure out every nook and cranny that I eat. I can only have fat-free, I can only have low cholesterol foods, right? You're aiming for a middle ground. So, you know, the middle ground, the way to look like Gumby and to be more flexible with, say, diet, is that now I will say, well, you know, 6 out of 7 days a week, I eat super healthy and I make really great choices. And it's okay every now and then, or if on that 7th day, that I eat the real butter, or that I have, the Chinese takeout, right? You're not trying to restrict yourself. You're trying to find that middle ground and to be more flexible like Gumby. And don't forget, Barbie's very rigid and she's also very thin. So anyway, Barbie has an eating disorder. Anyway, so numbers and weight. And for me, like I said, to the extreme that you can take that kind of rigidity would be developing an eating disorder, which I did, becoming fixated on a number. I must weigh 130. I must weigh 130. All right. Some other ways that I've been rigid are, I think, in my expectations of people. So what do I mean by that? I used to have this idea. Because my parents argued so much, I wasn't well socialized. I didn't have a lot of kids come over. I didn't get invited to a lot of parties. There was a lot of turmoil in my life growing up. And then, when I kind of got to high school, I felt awkward and I was like, the choir geek and the theater nerd, which was fine. I found my niche once I made it to high school. But I was never like the super popular girl, and I really didn't want to be. I would just really like a few close, true friends that I could rely on. But I think what I have found in the past is that I had very specific expectations for my friends. You must text me every day, or, back before the texting was really a thing, I must talk to you on the phone every night, or true friends of mine buy me gifts at my birthday, no matter what. I expect my friends to show up to every one of the parties that I give, right? So, and if they didn't somehow meet some of these markers, then I would be like, well, then they don't really care about me. The conclusion I would draw is they don't really care about me. They're not really my friends. And I was being very rigid, being very much like Barbie. So in trying to be more like Gumby, what I have done over the years through a lot of work, remember, personality disorders did not develop overnight and they're not going away overnight. So sit tight, because it takes a long time for them to recover on themselves with a lot of your work and attention. So what I learned to do was to be flexible in my interpretation of events, be flexible in how friends introduce themselves into my life. And one of the ways that I did that was categorizing what friendships are, right? So, we have neighbors, people we'll see that are our neighbors every day. We'll have acquaintances, we'll have work colleagues, you'll have, friends that maybe you see only at social gatherings, or, a group activity, like maybe you joined a meetup pottery group. And so you have those friends there. And then, you'll have like your true close friends that like would come bail you out of jail, right, at 2 a.m. or help you fix a flat tire. Those are like your real friends. So kind of for me, like now I can have these categories where, not everyone is kept to the same. I mean, obviously it's healthy to have expectations of people, otherwise I think you could very easily become a doormat. I don't mean unrealistic expectations, but now I just don't have expectations that everyone is going to meet all of those markers. For my neighbors, I have an expectation that generally they'll say hi to me in the hallway. And if they don't, that's fine. I don't care. They're just a neighbor, right? I'm a lot less let down now by kind of a rebuff or a perceived rebuff like that than I would be from someone who I speak with every day. So that's a way to become more like Gumby in reevaluating your expectations and seeing if they're truly fair. Do they really make sense? It's okay that you can have a friend that doesn't live up to your expectations in the exact way that you want them. That doesn't mean compromising, that they give you respect, that they're supportive, that they're positive, like whatever you need out of a friend. I have some friends that I just text to like complain about shit that goes wrong in the building that I live in, right? And we talk about our dogs, but like other than that, like our relationship's not very deep. And then I have other friends where like, if like I had like a medical appointment today that was a little bit intimidating for me to go to. You know, I had one friend that I was like confiding in, and she knew about it, and you know, when I came home, I was like, hey, the appointment went really great, and she's like, oh, that's great, right? So there are different expectations. Like, I wouldn't send that doctor appointment text to just say like my neighbor. So those are a few examples of how I try to be more flexible like Gumby and less rigid like Barbie. Some things to think about is that when you have your HALTs on high, and HALTs are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick, or stressed. HALTs is an acronym, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick, or stressed. That when you are feeling any one of those things, that acronym, you have a lowered self-resilience. You're more susceptible to stresses, illness. You know, I know for me, like if I don't get a good night's sleep, then I don't think very well. I know that if I've forgotten to eat and it's 3 o'clock, I'm like, I really need to eat something like right now. If you've noticed any of those things are compromised, perhaps you might notice that that's a time when you start becoming more rigid. I have seen that. I have that a little bit more under control now because I have a set routine and I ensure that I'm eating and exercising and creating my self-care time and taking time off when I'm sick and when I need to, so that that's coping ahead, right? I did a video about coping ahead. So that's a way that I mentally and physically cope ahead so that I don't have these other things pop up, like this rigid thinking, right? Another thing that I've noticed is that during times of high stress, I tend to fall back in rigid thinking. So the holidays, for one, or, you know, traveling, right? Sometimes traveling, although it's great and it's fun, it can be stressful at the same time. Right? Like, is the car going to meet us? Like, did the hotel get our reservations? Like, perhaps the people that you're traveling with, they're becoming agitating to you. So holidays, illnesses, travel, any weddings, funerals, any kind of like big event, like a new job even. So these are times to prepare yourself and write out your cope aheads. Check out what that video is and what the cope ahead is. I have found it super helpful and effective so that you don't fall into these rigid ways of thinking. Now, why is it important to think more like Gumby and less like Barbie? Well, the answer here is that rigid is more closely associated with your borderline personality disorder and is super highly tied to black and white thinking, splitting, lack of object constancy. It also ties right into emotional ability. You know, the more rigid you are, if something doesn't go your way, then you might have like more of a reaction. And so the whole name of the game here, and the whole reason that DBT was invented, dialectical behavior therapy, was in part to reduce emotional ability and replace maladaptive behaviors with healthy, more effective ones. And that all starts in the brain, right? You think it before you say it, and you say it before you do it. It's all in the mind. So the more in practice you get with thinking more flexibly, and acting in a more flexible manner, then you will find yourself being more flexible. And in turn, I have found that, you know, people stick around longer. They want to be my friend. Things go more smoothly for me. I don't feel a sense of stress. You know, the whole point of my channel and my videos is to help you become more effective. And that means for myself as well. You know, these videos can be really great reminders for me. You know, when I'm saying it out loud, I now feel accountable to an audience. And, you know, that reminds me, like, okay, well, it's helpful for me to practice what I preach. Anyway, you've been watching the BPD Woman. My name is Jen. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider subscribing. I'd love to hear your comments below. Do you tend to think more rigidly like Barbie? Or can you find moments where you are acting and feeling more like Gumby? And remember that it's the gray area. You don't need to act like Gumby all the time. There are certain times where rigidity is just perfectly fine and acceptable. For instance, you know, let's just say a custody, you know, you have a custody agreement. You know, there are certain times when you are going to want to be rigid on that. Like, no, you get baby at 5 p.m. on Friday, and then I get the baby back Saturday at 6 p.m., whatever, right? Those are okay instances to be rigid. Now, you could also be flexible, like let's say you and your spouse trade off certain holidays that you have the kids, whatever, things like that. Anyway, my name's Jen. You've been watching BPD Woman. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will talk to you soon. And until I do, in whatever you do, think or say, try and please to be effective. Bye-bye.